The Senate Committee on Natural Resources will now come to order. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Senator Flores. Present. Senator Goycochea. Here. Senator Hansen. Here. Senator Pizzina. Present. Senator Scheibel.
Please mark Senator Scheibel absent excused. There are 4 members present, so we do have a quorum. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping reminders. We'll only do this for a few more committee meetings, but we do have a lot more present, so we'll just share those again today. Please be sure to mute your laptops and turn off cell phones. Otherwise, someone up here on the dais will feel obligated to answer it. The public is advised that during meetings, legislators and staff are using laptops to view bills and exhibits. We're trying to be as paper-free as possible, so please don't think this is a sign of inattention or disrespect in any way. Please note that we'll be requiring everyone to submit exhibits in an electronic format the day prior to the meeting. A few reminders about testifying before the committee. We would ask that everyone sign in by the door. Give the committee secretary your business card if you have one prior to testifying. And even if you're not testifying, you may want to sign in so that there is a record of who's interested in a particular bill in case the committee needs to contact you at a later date. When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state your name. The first time around, sometimes it's helpful to spell it for us as well. And please state your affiliation, if any, for the record. Then turn the microphone off each time that you've completed speaking. If you have handouts for the committee, you're asked to provide 10 hard copies to the committee secretary for use by the public. We will be taking public comment at the end of each meeting. I'll be limiting public comment to 2 minutes per person to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak. Please feel free to provide any additional comments in writing to the committee secretary so that they may be added to the record. So we have a bit of an adjustment to the agenda today. We have 2 bills that we're hearing and then 2 committee presentations. The first bill that we're going to hear is SB 88, followed by a committee presentation from Director Settlemyer, and then SB 13, and then after that we'll be hearing from the state engineer. So, without further ado, we'll begin the bill hearings, and we'd like to start with Senate Bill 88. I'll now open the hearing on Senate Bill 88. This measure requires the Joint Interim Committee on Natural Resources to conduct an interim study of certain state agencies. Assemblyman Watts, welcome. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I am Howard Watts. I have the honor of representing Assembly District 15 in Clark County. I also had the distinct honor of chairing the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Natural Resources during the 2021 to 22 interim. Senate Bill 88 will require the following interim, the 2023 to 2024 interim, to conduct an interim study of certain state agencies. Just to give a little bit of background on where this came from, during the last interim, I heard from several different stakeholders about their interest in adjusting either the makeup or mission of multiple entities that regulate various natural resources. We've seen several members, and I don't want to call out any specific members of the legislature or specific bills, but we've seen many proposals across every session to change things such as the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, to modify the way that the mining industry is regulated, and I in fact brought a bill unsuccessfully on that front last session. We did actually undertake a reform of the Board of Agriculture last session, and on some of these more difficult issues where there's been a lot of debate, where a measure's been brought forward, its merits have been supported or opposed, and oftentimes we haven't really seen progress move forward. It feels like vetting those issues based on one individual proposal during the legislature isn't the appropriate way to move forward. And as I was continuing to get feedback on the way that various boards or agencies regulate different natural resource issues, we kind of ran out of time in the previous interim, and I felt that the most appropriate thing to do would be to create time in the next interim where these issues can be really fully vetted. And so the concept behind Senate Bill 88. It includes a couple of these entities that have been subject to these conversations, including the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, the Commission on Mineral Resources, DCNR, and the Environmental Commission. And it would set aside some dedicated time and meeting space during that interim where we could learn from groups such as the National Conference of State Legislatures about the models of regulation that exist in other states, including other Western states. We could learn about trends in terms of how maybe the mission, the scope, or the makeup of these entities have changed over time, including over recent years. And then we could invite any interested stakeholder to bring forward their proposal and be able to have a back and forth discussion with legislators, which really is best suited, in my opinion, to the interim and not to having one individual proposal that's being brought forward to the legislature to debate its merits. So that's really the concept. There is no predetermined outcome. So following that conversation, that interim committee could choose to recommend one or more pieces of legislation or none to make these changes. I think the last thing that I would add when it comes to this is we do have the Sunset Subcommittee, but really what it's doing is reviewing entities to make sure, are they meeting and are they fulfilling their existing statutory duty? This is taking a step back and looking at issues that body doesn't necessarily do, which is looking at the mission, looking at the makeup, looking at the process, and seeing if there are other ways that it could be adjusted to be more inclusive of different stakeholder voices and to take into consideration all of the relevant concerns as time goes forward. So that is the concept, and with that, I'll conclude my remarks and stand for any questions that the committee may have. The one last thing I'll say is that I believe this was passed unanimously by the Joint Interim Standing Committee during its work session.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman. Are there any questions from the members of the committee? Senator Goicoechea?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Assemblyman Watts. I just got a couple of questions on this. Now, as you read the bill, it says the committee shall examine without limitation, but are we just talking these 4 departments, and then of course DCNR is 13 agencies, so we're technically talking about 16 agencies, correct? Or do you believe with the statement without limitation you could actually look at other agencies?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. So yes, without limitation would allow for the consideration of other entities. I will say when it comes to the department, I don't see the intent of this as requiring every single division to be evaluated within DCNR. Again, this list was essentially just to provide a little bit of substance about what we're talking about and provide a foundation based on some of the conversations that have come up the most. And, really it's been around wildlife, mining, and again, there were some conversations that came up around particularly some of the management of wildlife, endangered species, and so that's really what led to this being the list. But without limitation would allow, if somebody has another idea, that could be proposed for inclusion.
Well, thank you. And I guess as I look at that and the ability to expand this list, how many meetings do you think we're going to have?
Thank you for that. Assemblyman Howard Watts for the record. And again, the purpose of this bill is to ensure that this is on the agenda for the next interim. It will be up to the chair to decide how they would like to structure the meetings of the next interim in order to handle that. I would think at a minimum, we're going to have one long day of meetings, potentially more than that. But again, that ultimately will be a decision to be made by that chair. And my hope is that through going through the process of considering and passing this bill and the awareness that that generates, as well as the introductory meeting of that joint interim standing committee, that we'll get that interest on the front end, and the chair will be able to determine the amount of meetings early on to accommodate this goal.
And thank you, and I truly believe there will be a lot of interest in it, and I can see 2 meetings a month for the rest of your life. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Flores?
Thank you. Assemblyman Watts, thank you for that presentation. I also, too, just wanted to get into the practical approach to this. If the bill weren't to pass, would they be able to do it anyways without this bill? That's the first question. And if the answer is yes, I'm assuming you're going to say yes, but this is now putting it on the forefront and ensuring that they have to do it. But I just wanted to get clarification if they could do it without this bill. And then the second thing is, are there other practical benefits to putting this piece of legislation forward? And if I could specify what I mean by that, as an example, does it give us resources with LCB staff to potentially be involved and help us? Does it give us additional resources for the committee that perhaps previously they didn't have? I'm trying to understand that side of it.
Thank you for that question, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. So I'll take your questions in order. First, the answer is yes. If this measure were not adopted, the next interim could take up this issue on its own. What this does is ensures that it is going to be addressed, that it is part of the proceedings of this next interim committee. And I would agree that it also raises the profile of this as one of the more important issues that should be addressed because it's required. So when it comes to your second question around resources, as you are aware, Senator, we've restructured the interim, and I'm thankful for that because I think this new joint interim standing structure allows us to really get issues and create a bit of continuity between our regular sessions and our interim. And so, in the past, it might be argued that a separate study committee would be beneficial and actually be able to dedicate more time to it, but then it's more committees that a set number of legislators have to try and allocate time to during a very busy interim. So this wouldn't avail this effort of additional resources beyond what our joint interim standing committees already get from LCB staff. But again, I think that there are other entities such as NCSL and others who could provide some additional background information and support to this effort.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Hansen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess the problem I have with this is that there's kind of a presupposition that mining, wildlife, and agriculture hasn't been thoroughly vetted and all these things for years. I mean, I go back to Bob Miller's reorganization of state government. I've been in this building lobbying on these exact issues for 30 years, all dealing with the composition of the Wildlife Commission, mining regulation, ag. And so for me, it's almost a little bit insulting because all this stuff we're talking about has been thoroughly vetted for years. And it's sort of like there's this supposition that, well, nobody's talked about this previously, and it just isn't the case. I'm kind of wondering the genesis of this, if it's like we want to remake all this and redo it, okay, then let's say that up front, rather than saying, well, I don't think this stuff's been studied previously, because it's been studied extensively. So if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
I'd be glad to. Thank you, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. And again, I think, again, I can speak for myself, and I know that there are other members who have all brought measures forward that have spurred conversation on these issues. So in that sense, I do agree with you that these conversations have been had. However, I think that we've actually been a little bit limited in the fact that a legislator brings forward a proposal, likely brought to them by a constituent or another stakeholder, and then we are here during the session really trying to support that idea if we agree with it, or stop it if we disagree with it. And I think that narrows some of the discussion that is had on some of these issues. So the idea of this is to actually step back and take that wider look at some of these issues and look at them together, so that instead of one person's proposal to modify the Board of Wildlife Commissioners in one direction and another person's proposal to modify it in a different direction, which best case scenario are going to be heard on the same day in the legislature but are separate hearings, this provides the opportunity for many different perspectives to be brought forward and vetted. And in that interim structure, the same way that we can really only discuss one bill at a time here in the legislature, we can have some of that back and forth with different ideas and proposals in the interim. So that's the hope, is that we can actually have on some of these issues that have been going around for a long time, hopefully a more productive conversation. And again, perhaps legislation will come out of it, perhaps it will not. But certainly the intent behind it is that we can have a little bit bigger picture discussion and see what's out there, including, honestly, things that might be outside of the ideas that have been brought forward by some of those constituents or stakeholders before that might have a lot of value.
Thank you, Manager. If I could have a follow-up. We've had extensive, productive conversations on this. I think my biggest concern here is that the three industries you specifically singled out are critical economic issues to the rural parts of the state. And the rural parts of the state are already feeling very, very overwhelmed by the complete dominance of the process by Clark County. And so when I see a committee being made up of people that don't necessarily have a vested interest in mining or wildlife or agriculture, then that is a huge red flag, because essentially 3 million people live in Nevada and 2.5 million of them are predominantly in Clark, and yet the other people have a dagger at their throat if these regulatory bodies change substantially how these processes occur. So for me, I see this as a huge red flag, because now instead of having the people that are significantly economically interested in these issues, rural Nevada, instead we're now going to have this big, broad discussion of how all these things should be without taking into consideration or giving frankly, a disproportionate influence of the people that will be directly influenced by these regulatory agencies. So that, to me, it's just like a big dagger at the heart of rural Nevada. So that's why I'm a little gun shy of this whole concept of let's just bring all these stakeholders in, because the bulk of the stakeholders are really rural people.
Thank you for that, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. I understand your concerns, and if you have suggestions on the language, I'd be open to them, although at the end of the day, I think you and I would both agree that any evaluation of natural resource issues and regulation is going to be of particular importance to rural communities. Also, I would respectfully disagree with the assertion that those folks don't have a voice. Again, I know you served as an alternate at some of the meetings of both the Joint Interim Standing Committee as well as the Subcommittee on Public Lands. Senator Goycochea served as a member on that. Assemblywoman Hansen served on the Joint Interim Standing Committee. So there is representation of those communities on the committee. And again, I think the idea is that this is creating a forum where those voices can be brought forward as well. And ultimately, some of the issues that you've brought forward are unfortunately just related to the fact that we are a very urbanized state where most of the population is there, most of the representatives are there. And again, I think this is an opportunity to make sure that all perspectives can be heard through this process.
Well, we'll have to keep debating this one out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman. I don't have any questions at this time, so I would like to open up testimony in support of SB 88. I would also like to share that we are going to limit testimony to 2 minutes per person so that we give everyone the opportunity to share their thoughts. So, is there anyone here in Carson City who would like to testify in support? Please come up and speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Patrick Donnelly, Patrickdonnelly. I'm Great Basin Director with the Center for Biological Diversity. We support SB 88. We've certainly been one of the stakeholders making noise about the composition of our commissions in this state. But believe it or not, I actually don't think the Center for Biological Diversity ought to decide those things unilaterally. And, you know, I think what Assemblyman Watts was describing, this process of, well, we bring forward a bill and that's the terms of the debate, you know, is limiting. And having a broader discussion about these things where there can be a variety of perspectives will give us a better sense of where the people of the state stand than if we're just debating on one proposal in the legislature. Because again, I do think that, you know, one stakeholder, even a loud stakeholder, like this stakeholder, should not be the ones making those decisions. It should be a collaborative effort. So we support this bill and hope we can have the discussion during the interim. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, Warren Hardy, today representing the Nevada Conservation League and the Humane Society of the United States. We support this legislation as an opportunity to really take a look at the infrastructure. I mean, I first stepped foot in this building in 1991, and I was handed a document called the Price Waterhouse Revenue Study in Nevada. And I think, as far as I know, that's the last time we took a global, holistic look at our revenue structure in Nevada. And I know in the time I've been here, we haven't taken this kind of holistic infrastructure look at these departments. And so I look at this as an opportunity to make sure they're working together, making sure the missions are clear, making sure that one hand knows what the other hand's doing as we discuss these important issues. So we're in support of this study and hope that the committee takes it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, former Senator. Ms. Magnus?
Thank you, Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. Thank you for all of your great points, Assemblyman Watts. We are here in support of SB 88 because our natural resources and open spaces are too important and critical, not only for current generations of Nevadans, but for future generations as well. Because of this importance, we need to ensure our agencies and commissions are equipped with the right resources and people that represent all Nevadans and are streamlining the need to handle this responsibility to care for the natural treasures of our state. This study will help address the issues that many have had session after session, as Assemblyman Watts pointed out, and we hope that you will support it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Ms. Goff?
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders, and I am the Policy Director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, here in support of Senate Bill 88. First, I want to thank Assemblyman Watts and the members of the Joint Interim Committee on Natural Resources for their hard work in bringing forward a number of great bill drafts this past interim. It's time as a state we take a holistic look at how we manage and regulate natural resources in Nevada. As the driest state in the nation, we must ensure that we are protecting our limited water supply, and as a site for many extractive industries, we must ensure that we are placing people and planet first rather than corporations. We urge your support of this bill and look forward to engaging in the conversation with you over the next interim. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have anyone else who'd like to testify in support here in Carson City? Okay. BPS, is there anyone on the phone lines wishing to provide testimony in support of SB 88?
Chair, your public line is open and working, but you have no callers at this time.
Thank you. I will take that as a no. Next, we'll hear testimony in opposition of SB 88. Is there anyone here in Carson City who would like to testify in opposition? All right, BPS, is there anyone on the phone lines who'd like to testify in opposition of SB 88?
Chair, you have no callers at this time.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone here wishing to testify who is neutral to the bill? Okay. BPS, is there anyone who has somehow recently joined us on the phone lines in the last 30 seconds wishing to provide neutral testimony on SB 88?
Chair, you have no callers at this time.
Thank you so much. Assemblyman Watts, would you like to provide any closing remarks for us?
Thank you again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Howard Watts. I appreciate the questions and the conversation that was generated through the presentation of the bill. And I think it speaks to the importance of having this process. Again, at the end of the day, this is a process that could be undertaken on its own. I felt that it was beneficial to set up a framework that is more neutral, is more holistic, to have these conversations. And at the end of the day, it's not going to be the end. These conversations are going to continue to happen. But I do think that we can get some more ideas and more discussion and hopefully get something more productive out of the process that's envisioned in this bill. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Assemblyman, and I will now close the hearing on SB 88. Since we are moving the agenda around a little bit today, we'll be receiving a presentation next from the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Director Settlemyer, welcome. Please come forward, press the mic button, identify yourself for the record, and proceed with your presentation when ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We greatly appreciate the opportunity. My name is James Settlemyer. I'm the Director of the Division of Conservation and Natural Resources. With me today, we have Ms. Erskine, who's providing backup support. Kind of our legislative liaison is helping to make sure we do everything in the proper time frame and meet with your accordance. We also have, of course, the Division's Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Deputy, Dominic Etchegoin, who will be assisting today with the slide. With that, we'll proceed if you wish. So with that being said, it is never lost upon me that here I am giving PowerPoints. When in a different capacity, I wasn't always the biggest fan of PowerPoints, to say the least. So in that respect, I'll try to speed it up in that ability. So the DCNR, we are committed to conserving the environment, including air, land, water, and native ecosystems. I was a member of the Conservation District for over 2 decades. I was on the State Conservation Commission for 6 years, appointed by Gwynn and reappointed by Gwynn. I firmly believe in conservation of these natural resources. We're all about preserving the natural, cultural, and recreational resources. Being a 4th-generation agriculturalist within the state of Nevada, we must preserve it for the future generations, in my opinion. We're all about enhancing the quality of life by protecting public health, advancing sustainable recreation, responsibly managing the limited water resources. It is important, again, that we have all these things preserved for the next generation, and the only way to do that is to enhance the quality of life. We also seek to protect life and safety by creating fire-resilient communities, landscapes, supporting wildfire and natural disaster responses, and ensuring dam safety. Now, within that, that's a very lofty goal, because as we know, it's very hard with fires. You have great years, water-wise, and bad years, and no matter what, they all seem to be a fire year in that respect. We also provide community outreach, education, support in every county. So in that respect, we consist of 8 divisions, 4 programs, 15 boards and commissions, and 37 grant and loan programs at over 59 duty locations. And to me, that was a fascinating thing about coming in this position, all the different areas we are within the state. Because our mission is to conserve, protect, manage, enhance Nevada's natural, cultural, and recreational resources. With that, the next couple slides kind of run through the 8 divisions and the 4 standalone programs, which range from the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection, Nevada State Lands, Division of Water Resources, which we'll be giving a presentation here later. We also then on the next slide have outdoor recreation, Outdoor Nevada. We also have Nevada State Parks, Nevada Division of Forestry, State Historic Preservation Office, and of course the Nevada Division of Natural Heritage. With the 4 standalone programs, they are the OHV, Off-Highway Vehicle Program, Sagebrush Ecosystem, which is actually made up of 3 or 4 different entities from the Department of Ag, whose director is in the room today. We also have within it the Forest Service, and of course the Conservation Districts are represented as well. The Conservation District Program is next. With that, again, I'm very proud of the work that they do. They're phenomenal in their match characteristics in order to help the individual communities. 28 spread throughout the state. You can actually go to the DCNR website, and you can see where all 28 of those districts are in basically every county in the state of Nevada. We also have the Conserve Nevada program. So with that, that brings us to the key focus areas of the department. And again, we had a discussion a little bit ago about wildfire and natural resource management. To me, one of the things that's very important, you know, as we have these discussions, hold on a second, is that we always discuss the concepts of the wildfire. And when you have a great year, as I said earlier, it's funny because it tends to go a lot of tall sheetgrass that tends to burn, so we have to be on the lookout for those fires. And in a dry year, we have the opposite problem. We tend to have more beetle infestations and drier trees that unfortunately burn much faster and hotter. So it seems that we're always having, issues within that particular aspect that creates problems for us. The fire season seems to be extending further and further in that respect. With that, though, then we also have to, of course, protect Nevada's water resources, managing Nevada's limited water resources, water and drought response planning. Within that, no surprise, declining flows within the rivers down in Clark County. You have to service, from the Colorado River, 2.3 million Nevadans, and of course, all the visitors that come to the state at the same time. And there's always, a discussion about drought, especially after a wet year. But yet at the same time, roughly 19% of the state still remains in what's called extreme drought level, which is known as level D3, and that's done by the U.S. Drought Monitoring. So in that respect, level D0 is the lowest classification, meaning abnormally dry, whereas D4 is the highest classification, meaning exceptionally drought conditions. We're closing on 6 months with no exceptional drought in Nevada, which is great. This is an improvement compared to just a year ago when it was 7.5% D4. So things that we have to look out for the future, just because you have one great year, it doesn't necessarily mean you're completely out of it. We need to make sure to balance, of course, the sustainable multi-uses of Nevada lands, whether that be for municipal, whether that be agricultural, even down to the trails. It's fascinating to see a lot of the different programs that are making sure that you have OHV areas kind of designated, because sometimes it's not always best to have OHV and pedestrians in the same area. And speaking from personal experience, I know my horse did not enjoy very much having a guy come at it with a mountain bike wearing a inner tube on the back because he was going fishing. My horse did not like what that looked like for some reason. So sometimes making sure that we appreciate all the multiple uses, but having different areas is a wise thing. That being said, that takes us to our highlights and successes. Within that, we know we have our shared stewardship agreement with the federal partners. We're able with NDF recently, Nevada Division of Forestry, to actually work and actually secure $47 million in funds to implement cross-jurisdictional landscape wildfire mitigation. And we're very proud of what Casey was able to do within that, and the governors for working on that to get that agreement passed. So they've actually increased 47% the amount of acres they treated from last year to this year, or within a year period. That being said, Conservation District programs have also done an excellent job. They secured $250,000 for the Santa Rosa Paradise landscape, which is up in Humboldt County. And just for a frame of reference, imagine the exact center of the state at the exact most northern portion. Of course, Pete might want to correct me on that, or Ira, but you never know. But I figure that's a pretty good, fair description of that location. Within that, we're also working with Nevada Energy through the NDF. They secured $5 million for Forest Service to go through and look at those critical utility corridors in order to make sure that in an extreme wildfire event that we might have the potential ability to still have power and things of that nature. They actually protected 4,857 power poles. They responded to 58 wildfires with that running, 849 fuel breaks covering over 12,200 acres. So with that, we also have been doing a lot of work with the sagebrush ecosystem, which we're very proud to have such a cross-agency department that helps actually look at the sagebrush ecosystem and manage it to the best of our ability to increase the habitat for the sage grouse. The State Conservation Commission programs have done a great job in that respect. We also have a Conserve Nevada program, which leverages bond proceeds to enhance Nevada's natural, cultural, and recreational resources. We also, of course, have the Nevada State Lands, which has the opportunity to kind of act as our primary real estate agent in many respects for the state. They help secure properties and disperse of properties and work with local governments on exchanges and things that might be beneficial for them. Similar to a federal land exchange on occasion, there are opportunities to assist counties in that respect. So I'll go ahead and skip on to the next slide. The new visitor center at Spooner Lake, we're very proud of. It opened just to the public last November. Great opportunity. We're seeking this year to try to assist with the concept of a aquatic invasive species thing nearby, which would actually help to inspect the boats, but also help provide a parking system potentially, which would help reduce traffic within the basin, we hope. With that, we have the Nevada Off-Way Highway Vehicle Program, recently expanded 2 grant rounds per year each round now gives out $750,000 to different parties to help work on trails. They support off-highway vehicle-related projects, including trail improvements, mapping, signage, law enforcement, education, safety training, restoration, resource conservation, and quite a bit more. It's been fascinating to see that program grow over the years and what they've been able to do. Also, we have the Nevada Division of State Parks, who is actually working on a digital reservation system. I actually found it fascinating that up at Tahoe, Sand Harbor has over 1 million visitors a year. Not very far off of the 750,000 though that visit Valley of Fire down in the other part of the state. But between those two, then you add in Spring Mountain, which has 300,000 visitors, that accounts to 2 million. That's 2 million of the total 3.6 visitors to our parks. So basically 3 of them are the vast overwhelming majority. So in that respect, that digital reservation system is key, especially to the parks that are being more heavily used. And within that system, we will also be able to direct them. By the way, this park is rather full. There's one fairly nearby that's not quite as busy. So maybe that will increase the experience for many of the citizens of the state of Nevada. Additionally, State Parks is also developing a GPS mapping app to where an individual will be able to go and see all the trails that are on state property. We are not, of course, including any of them that are on private property or the federal. We're only dealing with lands that we are per se in control of as the state of Nevada. But that app will be very instrumental in helping people. As Bob McGill has indicated from State Parks, his overall philosophy and concept when he went forward, if it saved one person from getting lost in Valley of Fire and dying, it's worth the app. And I agree. So I applaud him for doing that. We have the Nevada Division of Outdoor Recreation, who has secured over $3.5 million in various forms of federal funding for outdoor recreational projects across the state of Nevada. They've done a remarkable job. I know that the Speaker in the Assembly is looking to give some additional resources, which we look forward to, through the Governor as well, for the purpose of outdoor recreational education. And I look forward to hearing the vision from the legislature of where they would like those funds to go, because after all, that's your job. You tell us, and it'll be our job to implement. We also have the Nevada Division of Water Resources. With that being said, since they're giving a speech here in a little bit, I think I'll just skip over them and let them, give you their visions. One of the things that the Nevada Supreme Court has done, though, is a commission to study the adjudication of water laws. And the concept of training up several judges and getting them up to speed on the variety of different water laws out there, I think is a very wise decision. I actually hope they look at the concept of traveling judges. I find it very difficult, sadly, for you get to certain communities, you may have 1 or 2 judges. For them to weigh in on a water project or a water move or water law puts them at serious risk of their next election. It would probably be wiser to have a traveling judge come in who can, in my opinion, just look at the facts and put forth the right ruling. That being said, we also have move on to the next slide number 10. We have the State Historic Preservation Office, who grants, and supports, strengthens local historic programs all across the state. It's been fascinating to visit a couple of those over the years, not realizing where they were. I was in Eureka a while back, was able to go to the coffee shop there and found out they were one of the recipients of those grants. And what they've done with it is amazing, restoring the woodwork, the rooms that were boarded off forever because no one took care of them. So it's fascinating to see how these things are being brought back through that office, and I applaud them for all the work they've been doing as well. They've gotten grants from Winnemucca to fund preservation plans. Again, remarkable work. Within that, we also have Conserving Nevada's Rare and Unique Ecosystems. The Nevada Division of Natural Heritage has a full-time Nevada Wetland Program Coordinator, which is important. We are the driest state, yet we do have wetlands. So in that respect, maybe it's far more important with the limited number we have to make sure we have someone cataloging them and helping to preserve them in the best of our ability. We also protect endangered species through the Natural Heritage Program, for anything from the yellow-billed cockatoo to the western ridge mussel, the steamboat buckwheat, and other at-risk taxonomies. So it's fascinating how many endangered threatened species or just species that are lower in number that we need to do our best to try to preserve. Using EPA funding through Nevada Department of Environmental Protection, we have started a drinking water lead testing program for child care centers in 2022, and we're doing our best to try to eliminate lead. Fortunately, in many respects, being a new state, we didn't use a lot of lead pipes. We also need to have some discussions, though, with the feds about extending that, because it talks about transmission lines, but then it gets to a regional hub and it says you can't go any further. Well, some of our problems with lead were in older places where they didn't necessarily have that. And so they were private water systems that were then sold. Do they qualify? Do they not qualify? We're running into some problems. But again, we're trying to work with the federal EPA to clear up those confusions in order, obviously, to try to remove any lead that exists anywhere as far as piping is concerned. As wildfire seasons have gotten a lot longer and more intense, the public is requesting more information from NDEP's air quality program on smoke conditions, particularly in rural areas. We had some of the most affected areas of air quality in the United States just last year up in northern Nevada. There were days at 3 o'clock, the streetlights literally came on, and it was a red sky until it was a black sky. And I've never seen in my life a situation where the sky went black in the middle of the day. So in that respect, they are trying to work on that to the best of our ability. We have major production activities. We're gearing up for the Anaconda Mine, which is over in Yerington. It's a site cleanup. We hope to get those things underway. Some of it will actually be done and completed within 2022. Phase 2 and 3 are anticipated for 2024 and 2025 to try to address some of those issues. Construction completion for those phases is targeted for final completion at 2029. With that, that actually kind of brings us to the last slide. And in that respect, you know, there's a lot of discussion with increased stewardship capacity through interagency coordination. And when I look at that slide, it reminds me of what I've been fortunate enough to do, is to walk into an environment within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources that has many divisions that don't believe in the concept of silos or walls. So with that, we had a bill just last week where the department within ours division, SHPO, didn't really have the ability to maintain the signs. And originally, previous administration was saying, well, we ought to send those to NDOT and, you know, send them to buildings and grounds. Fortunately, Bob McGill from State Park says, no, let's do it in-house. That way we can still have SHPO's knowledge and expertise on the text of the language be there. They have all the history. I can actually help out with the maintenance of those markers over a period of time. So I'm very grateful for that. The ability to work between those agencies is phenomenal, even with NDOT, who is a partner to that process as well. They've provided some funding every year for the concept of upkeeping those markers. Problem was, you put it out for bid and nobody would bid. It was $45,000 a year and nobody wanted it. Even if we said we'd limit to just looking at the markers at one county, they still didn't want it. No one would bid on it. And it's interesting, sadly, those markers, if going to a private entity, are about $9,000 a marker. So you'd only be able to build or put brand new ones in for a year. And with the 200 of them overall, 168 in active service, that's a really long time to get them fixed. So we're very grateful for what they've done in that respect. We try to utilize recent reliable data and best available science. It becomes difficult. There are different programs that will come up, such as precipitation studies, and the federal government's now looking at bringing up a different standard. If they bring that standard, the money we've spent on the most recent study is useless. Kind of like buying a new computer. The day sometimes we get completed or buy it, it's already out of date. But we need to do our best to have that data to make the best decisions. We implement Nevada's Water Conservation Infrastructure Initiative. Recently, $100 million was given to the department for that purpose. We have been trying to work on the criteria for that and getting it set up. We just had the first meeting, TAC meeting, Technical Advisory Committee, literally on the 17th of last month. So we're looking at a meeting coming up in a while to further on that. We manage Nevada's limited water resources, which DWR is going to go into far more in detail here in a second. We have large discussions currently within the conservation camp program. DOC has the ability to shut them down. I do not argue that in any way, shape, or form. That is their decision. And with a limited number of inmates, that is what is happening. But what are the consequences to those communities when those camps fold and go up? You're left with infrastructure out there that, according to the deeds, needs to be pulled out. Buildings need to go. What do we do with the water that's going to them? How do we manage those? And we're trying to help within, state lands to try to address some of those concerns. And of course, mitigating the threats of wildfire that we discussed earlier, invasive species. And of course, with high vacancy rates and turnover, there's a lot of people looking for jobs, but more importantly, there's just tons of jobs out there. And sadly, the state does not pay the most. If you look at jobs that are similarly situated, state employees could go work for Washoe County for about $15,000 to $20,000 more a year. They can go work down in Clark County for about $30,000 to $40,000 more a year. and that creates it very hard for recruitment purposes, let alone the private sector. And there is more than one occasion where I've had the opportunity to run into businesses and they complain that they're not necessarily getting certain paperwork done in time, and I say, I appreciate that, and I look over at the person to the right and I say, didn't you work for the state a year ago? Oh, yeah, okay. And that kind of explains some of the problems that we're having. But with that, I gladly stand for questions that anyone may have at this time.
Thank you so much, Director. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Hansen?
Except from
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not so much a question as a comment. And just so delightful for me to see one of our colleagues who we served with for over a decade in this position. It gives me a great deal of confidence in the future of the agency. And in spite of lawsuits and all that, we're here swinging for you, and I think you're going to do a fantastic job. And looking forward to seeing you more frequently in this committee or your some of your personnel. So anyway, I just want to get that on the record, Madam Chair. Good job.
Thank you. With that, to you, through you, Madam Chair, or can I go direct?
Please go direct.
With that, I appreciate that. Senator Hansen, as a couple previous other meetings, it has not been lost on the general public or other members of other committees that I am now a state employee and that Aaron Ford is my attorney. So thank you.
Senator Goicoechea.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to change the pace a little bit. You talked about the Nevada Water Initiative and that $100 million, and in this building, I'm getting a lot of mixed signals on where that money's actually going and if it has to meet the Treasury guidelines. Can you give us a little insight into that, or do you want me to wait for Mr. Sullivan?
Mr. Sullivan can try to elaborate on it, of course. Again, James Settlemeyer for the record, Director, DCNR. In that respect, the Treasury guidelines are pretty vague. There seems to be a lot of flexibility within that. However, the goal and ability is more aimed at water and sewer infrastructure based upon the concept that if the sewers leak, they contaminate the groundwater, and the nitrate problems are far more problematic to deal with, where if we clean them up now, we don't have them. But again, there's a fair amount of flexibility, and it'll be up to this body. I know that you potentially have legislation to look at, where some of those funds go. Currently, right now, within the Technical Advisory Committee, which I have an email I could grab my phone and look at, we had about 9 different entities on there, from TUMWA, Truckee Meadows Water Authority, from SNPLS, Southern Nevada Water Authority. We also had the Humboldt Water Authority on there as well. I forget their correct acronym, I apologize. We also had the Nature Conservancy. We had many individuals within said meeting that had a very good variety of interests. They had sent in some preliminary criteria, what they were looking for. We amassed one list, went through it together, deleted some things, and there was all votes were unanimous on saying we need to look at this differently. And of course, trying to figure out, I think we all know where we want to get the money to, is where we have the best effect. The question is, sometimes within the terminologies, we ran into a situation of, okay, how do we say that correctly? I'd said a couple terminologies, I was thinking of communities in need. And one of the tribal members there said, we don't necessarily care for that terminology. So we made sure, okay, then how do we get to the criteria we're looking at to make sure it gets to areas of need and to resources of need? So currently that group is still, working on that criteria, creating that program. We'll have another TAC here probably about the middle of next month, with a concept of by spring being able to roll it out to individuals to give us their applications, and then score them and start getting the money out in a very short time frame. Because again, we have about 1.5 years, 2 years total for implementation, and then it has to actually be 3 years be completed. And some of those resources will have to be spent to investigate. Because of course we want to make sure if they take money, they actually use it for the purpose they said.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. And of course, it's no secret, I really feel strongly about a piece of that money being used to reestablish our data that we need in the state. And I am concerned that if we start looking truly at infrastructure, wastewater, we'll end up, $100 million goes nowhere, where I feel we'd be a lot better served if we did, in fact, dedicate a piece of that money to the Division of Water Resources. And let's get our database back in shape so we truly know what we're working with. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions from the committee? Well, thank you so much, Director. I had one, more comment than question. Senator Hansen and I were in Growth and Infrastructure yesterday, and we heard a presentation from the Department of Transportation. And there was a really innovative way they were looking toward workforce development for the future and helping with the high vacancy rates and turnover that they had. It was working with students who could then begin to transition into a more full-time role with the department. It might be something worth looking into. It was fascinating, and I know this is a huge challenge in the state, and I look forward to seeing all of our agencies fully staffed. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that comment. Chairwoman, in that respect, we have been discussing the concept of talking to the schools about an internship program where they could roll in and work for us for 6 months in order to gain skills and knowledge, with the hope maybe they stick around with the state of Nevada. But either way, it would be a benefit to everyone. We'd have some bright young minds assisting us, and even if they were hired away by someone else, they'd get some of that training from us, as long as we don't spend too much money investing in them and then have them walk away. That's always a fear. But thank you, Conley, for the ability to present today.
Thank you so much again. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your presentation. And I will now open the hearing on Senate Bill 13. This measure revises provisions governing pest control, and I would love to see the bill presenter, Ashley Jepson from the Department of Agriculture, please come forward and proceed when you are ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Ashley Jepson, that's Jeppson. I'm the Division Administrator for Plant Health and Compliance with the Nevada Department of Agriculture, and I appreciate the opportunity to present Senate Bill 13. I promise my presentation will be brief. The changes are fairly minor and really just trying to clean up our language, making it more transparent what this specific statute does, and also making sure that we have our statute up to date with our federal partners with EPA to make sure we have the primary regulatory authority to regulate these provisions as opposed to EPA. So with that, I'll go over quickly the proposed changes that we do have here. I want to give a little bit of background quickly. The department does operate under a cooperative agreement with the Environmental Protection Agency to oversee these statutes. So basically the application of pesticides, the licensing, worker protection standards, all of the above. And with that, we do have to demonstrate that we meet minimum federal standards, and we do that through presenting our statutes and our regulations to EPA, as well as receiving an approved state plan that talks about how we're going to enforce all of these provisions. So with that, some of these changes were actually flagged by EPA as they were going through that review. So we're just trying to make sure that what we do is clear, that we're in alignment with them, and we can keep being the regulator, so to speak. So one thing I do want to draw attention to, we are proposing to add to the definition of pest control government applicators. I want to clarify, this is not meaning that this is a new provision. It's just trying to set aside that pest control applies to all of these different things. It applies to businesses, it applies to government agencies. They're already required to be licensed and certified in the statute and regulation. So if there was any confusion, I wanted to mention that. So trying to kind of set, here's all the things that folks must do, here's what pest control applies to, and then it goes into the nitty-gritty throughout the statute. If anybody wants any clarification on the fact that these folks already have to be licensed or certified, that's in 555-2657, if that's helpful. You'll see throughout the bill, we are replacing Environmental Pesticide Control Act with the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, so FIFRA. That's what we operate under anyway. The act that's been referenced here is highly outdated, and that act operated to make an amendment to FIFRA to strengthen the enforcement. So just a little background on that. We're just trying to clean up the language and make it clear that that's what we operate under is FIFRA. And then the last thing you'll see here, this is making changes to 555 and one change to 586. They're both very similar in what they do. 586 is a little bit different in that it regulates the distribution and retail of pesticides. So this is another area that the EPA flagged. We needed to specify that the sale and distribution of restricted use pesticides the records for those must be maintained at each place of business. What we're running into is we'll have a corporate location that's maintaining the records and not individual business locations. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jepson. Any questions from the members? All right, wonderful. Not seeing any questions. I would love to hear testimony in support of SB 13. Is there anyone here in Carson City who'd like to testify in support? Okay. BPS, is there anyone on the phone lines wishing to provide testimony in support of SB 13?
Chair, your public line is open and working, and you have no callers at this time.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear testimony in opposition of SB 13. Is there anyone here in Carson City who'd like to testify in opposition? BPS, has anyone magically joined the phone lines in the last few seconds wishing to provide testimony in opposition of SB 13?
Chair, you have no callers at this time.
All right, is there anyone who'd like to come up and testify in neutral on this bill? BPS, anyone on the phone lines wishing to provide neutral testimony on SB 13?
Chair, you have no callers at this time.
Okay. Ms. Jepson, would you like to provide any closing remarks?
For the record, Ashley Jepson, no, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'll now close the hearing on SB 13, and we will move into a presentation from the Division of Water Resources. Welcome, Mr. Sullivan. Please come forward, press the mic button, identify yourself for the record, and proceed with your presentation when ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Pazina and members of the committee. My name is Adam Sullivan, State Engineer and Principal Administrator of the Division of Water Resources, and with me is Micheline Fairbank, Deputy Administrator with the Division. Water Resources is one of the divisions within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, as Director Settlemyer just discussed. We are the state agency that has broad authority over all waters of the state, both groundwater and surface water, with the exception of the Colorado River. We'll give a brief overview here about how the division operates from a general statewide perspective, some of the challenges that we face, and what we're able to do to address that. And we have probably about 20 minutes. So our mission is to responsibly manage Nevada's limited water resources in accordance with state law and best available science. We deal with water quantity, questions of water quantity, the amount available to use and appropriate, rather than water quality. Water quality is within the jurisdiction of NDEP, our sister agency. And when I talk about water management here, primarily what I mean is through the administration of water rights and the determination of water availability and the potential for its use without conflicting with other uses. The division also has regulatory authority over the distribution of water under state decrees for rivers and streams, and and other areas, regulatory areas such as well drilling and dam safety. Water belongs to the public, and every use of water, whether a new appropriation or a change of an existing right, gets processed through our office and reviewed under the statutory criteria. There's a really well-developed and specific procedure for establishing and quantifying a water right to keep it in good standing and to transfer ownership. Water law is really good at this procedure that defines a lot of what we do as an office. There are tens of thousands of active water right permits within the state. We process something like about 1,000 applications per year. We also process about 1,000 changes in ownership per year, and approximately 6,000 extensions of time on existing permits to either prove up beneficial use or to prevent a forfeiture per year. And we're, as a division, we're really at capacity, just completing those fundamental processes that we're responsible for. But increasingly, the challenges that we face are in managing existing rights when there's an assertion or a concern that there's not enough water to go around to meet all those uses. And there's an expectation of NDWR to help resolve that. This is made complicated by the fact that water is a public resource, but water rights are a protectable private interest. So this is a dilemma where water law is not as well suited to direct us or direct the state of how to resolve this. And we'll discuss this more as we go along. So here I'd like to just provide some broad statewide context on water resources. This is a map of average precipitation across the state, with the red being the driest areas of less than about 8 inches per year. The oranges and yellow somewhat wetter, and then the blue areas the wettest with over 50 inches a year or so. The average across the state is about 10 inches. This year, as has been mentioned, has greatly exceeded average across most of the state, which is great. Most years, really, we are below average. Like the median is less than the mean. And a good way of thinking about it is that just typically we are in a drought condition, occasionally punctuated by a big year. But from a water management standpoint, I like to think of it that we're always in a drought. It's dry. So I'll mention that the state outline shown here delineates the administrative basins that are a framework for groundwater management across the state. And this slide also shows that delineation. So the basic rules of water rights and prior appropriation were really developed in the early part of the 20th century. And at a time when the water supply was almost exclusively from surface water, rivers and streams used for irrigation, smaller uses for mining, municipal needs. The technology to drill deeper wells and pump groundwater and access it and use it reliably was developed later on in the 20th century. And groundwater law in Nevada was established in 1939, which was generally is considered to be really ahead of its time among Western states. Our predecessors at the time were able to find ways how to honor existing law at that time and then adapt to the modern challenges of the day of now administering groundwater as a resource as well as surface water supplies. And one of the initial questions was, how do you really know how much groundwater is available to develop? In a river basin, water's either there or it's not. With groundwater, you just can't see it. How do you quantify that? If you experience drawdown, how much is too much? One of the processes that was initiated in the mid-20th century was to delineate these administrative basins to at least compartmentalize areas, valleys where there's concentrated irrigation, and try to come up with a water budget for that basin to get an idea of how much would be available in the long term. And these are generally topographically delineated based on mountain ranges and valleys of the basin and range. So by the 1970s, there were reconnaissance level estimates that estimated the average water budget across these basins. But even at that time, the existing commitments exceeded what was estimated to be the natural water budget. And today, about half of those basins are in that condition. Now, whether there's really a problem with that and how severe it is, either now or into the future, really depends on those localized conditions. In some locations, actual water use really, the actual pumping exceeds the water supply. There's chronic drawdown. There's acute issues and problems with water supply that need to be resolved. In other locations, it could really take centuries of current pumping level before you'd anticipate any kind of lack of supply. So this is a situation that we've inherited, that we're in based on sort of generations of development. And again, the question into the future is how are we going to be able to manage water within our means, within the existing water budget, and still be able to protect senior rights and support the public interest through the contemporary needs for economic diversification, environmental protection, and so on. So DWR is faced with questions of this nature a lot in different ways in different parts of the state, and we're not really built, we're not staffed or funded or explicitly told through statute of how to resolve this. And it's a gradual process. It can be really litigious. It can be frustratingly slow for the people who are affected by this. And the saying that I heard recently that I liked was that we're crossing the river by feeling the stones, and that resonated with me. This is a tough process, and we're trying to get there, but it's not quick. Okay, so the more data that we get through well drilling and understanding the lithology, through groundwater development, monitoring data, hydrologic studies, the more we really understand about the long-term water availability. This figure is a map from the USGS that shows general aquifer types across the state. And I like this. Aquifer types are just different types of rock or basin fill material that have different permeability, different storage capacity, different connectivity with the surrounding area. And this is just one way of visualizing what governs groundwater occurrence and movement in reality, in beyond just topographic basins and the perennial yield. So when we're addressing complex problems, in some areas we really need to start thinking about the regional groundwater flow systems. In some places, really deep wells or substantial concentrated pumping can change the hydrology and effectively change the water availability. And there may be long-term effects that we still really do not understand or can't project. So administratively, we operate within the relatively straightforward concept of basins, perennial yields. And we need that for us to be able to do our job and serve the public. It's a good conceptual starting point. It's easy to relate to. It's like the checking account concept, and I use that too. But it's just important to remember that when it can be misapplied, it can be inaccurate, misleading when addressing some of our most complex water management problems that we'll have into the future and still be able to protect the senior rights for our users.
Micheline Fairbank, for the record, Deputy Administrator with the Division of Water Resources, and so I'm going to kind of carry on here. So one of the things that we want to go ahead and touch on is, what the state's authority is to reduce commitments and manage those shortages. And the statutory limitations or the statutory available tools are relatively limited. So when we talk about trying to reduce commitments under the present statutory structure, we're really constrained to cancellation, forfeitures, and abandonments of water rights. And each of those come, with their own host of challenges. There's, state policy is towards the beneficial use of water, and our state law provides for, gracious allowances to go ahead and try to prove up and, certificate a right, meaning, place that water to beneficial use. Forfeiture is another challenge for us. Under state law, there's a presumption that after 5 years of non-use, a water right is forfeited, but there's a significant amount of administrative processes that take place on our end involving a significant and intensive review and investigations to assure that that non-use has occurred, the extent of non-use, as well as noticing provisions. And the amount of time and staff resources it takes to do that is substantial. And then abandonment of water rights is really kind of the last straw of, tools that we have in terms of reducing commitments presently. And that's an incredibly high bar as well for us to go ahead and try to make a demonstration and establishment. And again, it involves a significant amount of staff time and resources to go ahead and research, the original use of the water, the history of use of water, because ultimately the state engineer is obligated to make a showing that there was an intent of that water user to abandon. And so making a showing of intent is a pretty hard bar for us to go ahead and secure. Other statutory tools available to the division and to the state engineer is curtailment by priority. So where there's insufficient water resources to meet the demands and needs, then you regulate by priority within the available water supply. On a surface water system, that's kind of, those who have deliveries off of surface water systems are generally accustomed to there's years when you're in priority and you have water available, and there's years you don't. But when we talk about groundwater usage, groundwater availability, and groundwater curtailment, it's a much more challenging and complex discussion, and it's not quite as simple as the water simply isn't there. Finally, is we have the ability to go ahead and designate critical management areas, and with that, it commences a statutory time clock for the community to come together and develop a plan to try to remove those conditions that warrant the designation of the critical management area. Presently, that's a 10-year time clock, and then if that plan is not developed and approved by the division, then the division is obligated to manage or regulate by priority. So again, it's just the ultimate hammer is that curtailment by priority. But when we think about management of water resources on a statewide basis, it's really a partnership. It's a partnership with the Division of Water Resources, and it's a partnership with our local entities. And actions at the local level really do and can make a significant difference. Some of the things that we've identified that have been productive for the division and for the state is that where local government and local regulatory agencies are establishing conservation measures within those municipalities. For what it's worth, the Southern Nevada Water Authority is probably the national and world leader in terms of identifying and developing conservation measures, and that can have it can be instructive to other areas, but it's also to remember, it's important to remember that conservation measures that are beneficial for one area of the state, one community, one municipal water supplier may not translate the same way to other municipalities and other regions. Requiring dedication or over-dedication of water rights through county ordinances is another local mechanism that is effective to help try to bring back or help manage those water resources. And so, we've seen that the Pahrump Basin has a very high dedication rate for residential developments, and we see that that is an effective and useful tool. Elsewhere in the state, we've also seen that our agricultural producers have been working towards trying to make locally derived solutions and making changes, and that's by voluntarily reducing irrigation uses, either by fallowing crops, by changing crop type, and doing other mechanisms in order. They've been doing deficit irrigation and to other different types of opportunities that the local water users are implementing at their own initiative. But we're seeing and working with them in collaboration to see that it is effective and it is making a difference. And so, the state, our role is really complementary and works in conjunction with these, every community member, every governmental entity's obligation to help carry out and honor Nevada's water law, and as well as to preserve and stretch our resources as far as we can. So currently within the Division of Water Resources, we're doing some things to help build the foundations that we need for our long-term needs. And so some of this is one, we're doing our day-to-day work, those core functions. So we're giving a thorough review of those filings to assure that it's conforming with the existing law. If there's a application for extension of time, has the applicant fulfilled their statutory obligation to make a showing of good faith and reasonable diligence? Are they demonstrating steady application of progress towards perfection of the right? Are they putting the water to use, or are they making those diligent efforts? We're in the process of updating and revising the state water plan, which hasn't been updated since, I believe, 1999. So it's long overdue, and it's an important component to help us collaborate and work with our local communities. It's not intended to supplant or take the place of local water planning, but it's intended to be a complementary tool. We're also implementing the Nevada Water Resource Initiative, and that's the use of the $6.4 million in ARPA funding awarded to the division to update the baseline science that we utilize in terms of understanding water budgets when we're making decisions with respect to water availability. And we're also modernizing our processes and records through the digitization initiative. So I spoke about the Water Resource Initiative. It's really just going to, if we have questions, State Engineer Sullivan is certainly the one to opine on those, the specifics of that project, but it really is going to be an important project where we're passing through that funding to DRI and USGS, who are actually doing the work. And so just to kind of wrap up, as oftentimes people ask like, well, how the water is used statewide, where are the water dedications or the manners of use. So for surface water, about 65% of all surface water is used for irrigation purposes, 15%, a little more than 15% is municipal. Wildlife and recreation or in-stream flows are about another 18%, and then other uses are less than 1%. And the average annual surface water usage is approximately 4 million acre feet annually. And then our groundwater use, again, has similar but more diversified manners of use, with irrigation being 67%, municipal use 9.4%, mining utilizes about 10%, and then we have various other manners of use that take up those remaining percentages. And with that, we'll go ahead and open up to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you both for the informative presentation. Do we have any questions from members?
You don't have any questions? I'll leave.
No, go ahead. I'll let you take the lead.
I'll go first if you want.
Senator Hansen.
Thanks. A couple of questions. Conjunctive management, we sat down and talked the other day for quite a while. Thank you very much, by the way, for being so open and coming and visiting. As you know, Humboldt River's mainly in my district, and there's tremendous concern over the fact that when you do the measurements at Palisade, the flow in the river, by the time it gets to Winnemucca, is about gone, and by the time it gets to Rye Patch, there's no water left. The Lovelock farmers have senior water rights. So the conjunctive management part of the question, I'm kind of wondering where you guys are going with that as far as the Humboldt River drainage especially. How can you tell my farmers down in Lovelock who have the senior water rights, how in the future you guys are going to be able to hopefully get enough water so they can keep their farms going? Because they do have prior appropriation, they should have first right to the water since they are the seniors on the whole system?
Adam Sullivan, for the record. Thanks for that question, Senator Hansen.
Go direct, she's saying.
Go direct. Okay. Thank you. Yes, that's a good example of one of the challenges that we really face in water management. It's not just in the Humboldt River. It's in really with all surface water systems where there's groundwater pumping within that basin. Humboldt River is an important example because it is so long and slow, and it has such strong dynamics, like you mentioned. In dry years, especially in successive drought years, those losses get worse and worse each year, and it's hard to get water just to move through the system. So we've been working on this for intensively for 6 or 7 years now, and there's been different waves of public discussions about how to handle this effectively and not cause additional harm in trying to solve one problem. We've embarked with the USGS and DRI in developing groundwater flow models to really understand the hydrology of this system. And then if we were to take different management actions within the basin, we could explain why we're doing that and be able to demonstrate that it would actually work. Because, like I said, we need to be careful not to create new problems by solving other problems. And we continue to engage with the public that would be affected by those decisions, and we don't have the answer, but we're driven by protecting senior rights, and but also by allowing beneficial use of other rights where it does not directly conflict with those delivery of those senior rights.
Thanks, Madam. Just so you know, since you're new here, these guys have the toughest job in the state. Trying to solve all the water problems in the state is, as he just pointed out, just trying to answer a question, all of the different aspects that he has to try to, so he can tell me, and he still can't give me the answer, because frankly, it's almost impossible to get the answer. So it'll take years to figure some of that out. You mentioned when we were talking privately about all the staffing needs you have, so you can frankly solve some of the problems that we just discussed. I don't know if this is the committee to bring it up, but I'm kind of wondering if you had a chance to talk to the financial people to try to get the funding in the budget so that you guys can get the number of staff people to deal with so many of these questions that we're trying to address.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Micheline Fairbank for the record. We're continuing those discussions, and we're working with the director's office with those discussions to see, what the appropriate and balanced approach is.
Good. Well, I'll talk to James on it for you too. So I just flattered him, so I'm gonna get a little thing. A real simple question now. Last one, I promise. On the injection, or on the wells, the groundwater, you saw a municipality portion of it was pretty substantial. Now, like in the Reno Sparks area, they do a lot of injection wells, and then how do you guys calculate that? They're pumping water into basically an aquifer that they may have already depleted. It builds up, then in drier years, they then pull that out. Is that included in the groundwater calculations, or how do you calculate that?
Adam Sullivan, for the record. I think what you're referring to is the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Program.
Yeah, where they pump water in and then in dry years they pull it back out, right?
Exactly, yeah. So what they're using is decreed surface water rights to divert off the river, inject into the aquifer, and then what our office does is work with them on developing a feasibility plan and a storage accounting plan to figure out how much can be recovered over a period of time, because you do have some losses. You can't just indefinitely store it there. It's a smart water management move. Ultimately, it's coming from that surface water decreed right. So that's where it would show up on.
So on your pie chart, it was on the surface water, 4 million something, not the groundwater, 1.5.
Yeah, that's counted. That's counted where it's initially diverted out of the river.
Okay, that's just curious how you calculated that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator. And we're in agreement that water is one of the most complex and challenging issues that we'll be facing here in this room. So, Senator Goicoechea?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to continue to beat a little bit on how much staffing and how much more money you need. The 6.4 million that came in ARPA funding over a 4-year period, that won't buy you the gas to do the inventory. I'm sorry, you need help and we need to get it to you. So more of a statement than a question. Like you said, we're looking at pre-1970 recons, and that's being very generous if you say 1970 recon studies that quantified the water out there. We need to update that, and I'm sorry, that's just a fact of where we are. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you so much. I know this is a complex topic, and we really appreciate you coming in today and answering questions. So seeing no further questions, thank you very much for your presentation. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and take action on Senate Bill 13, revising provisions governing pest control. I'll entertain a motion to do pass SB 13.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion from Senator Flores and second from Senator Hansen. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. I'll assign the floor statement to Senator Goicoechea. Thank you so much. All right, our final business today is public comments. As a reminder, public comment is limited to 2 minutes per person, but please feel free to submit additional written comments to the secretary and they will be added to the record. Is there any public comment here in Carson City? Seeing no one racing to the front to share their thoughts and opinions, BPS, is there anyone wishing to provide public comment on the phone lines?
Chair, your public line is open and working, but you have no callers at this time.
Thank you. Seeing no further public comment, that concludes our meeting. Meeting adjourned.